At the 5th day of our conference, Virtual Maths Fest 2020. For this panel discussion, we have with us Dr. Tulsi Srinivasan from Azim Premji University. She will be the chair for this session today. Okay, over to you, Tulsi.
Okay, thanks, Soumya. I just want to welcome everyone to this panel, which is on educational challenges in undergraduate mathematics. I hope everyone can hear me.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So the thinking behind holding this session is that we have such a variety of undergraduate programs at which mathematics is taught, from the programs hosted by research institutions to those at state colleges, private colleges, maths taught at engineering colleges, and so on. And while the aims of these programs and the type of students who join them are very different, as instructors, we seem to face a lot of extremely common challenges. And there's maybe not so much literature in pedagogy at the undergraduate level and not so many resources. So I would really like to thank the organizers for deciding to add this session to the conference. So this includes the core organizing group of Shoyon, Soumya, and Saurabh, but also Jam, Arul, Prathamesh, and Divakaran. I also want to thank the panelists. So we have Dr. V.V. Acharya, Dr. Amber Habib, Dr. Fozia Kazi, and Dr. Geeta Venkatraman. And I think we are extremely fortunate to have a panel that brings such a wide variety of experience. So between them, they've taught maths in multiple contexts at the university level, but they've also been involved at MTTS, Maths Olympiad training, teacher training workshops, events for school children, and they've also contributed to curriculum design at, again, university as well as school level. And because of this wide variety of experience that they have, they're going to share their thoughts at this panel at both the large scale, so structural problems and possible solutions there, as well as small scale, which I think is going to be very useful for undergraduate instructors who are present, including me at this conference. So experiences by their students, experiences by themselves and their department members, classroom practices, experiments in pedagogy and assessment, advising, mentoring, and so on. Given the theme of this panel, it would have been nice to have a kind of free-flowing conversation, but I think we collectively decided that Zoom is not the correct medium for that. So instead, what we'll do is that each of the panelists will speak a little bit about one or two sub-themes under this broad umbrella of educational challenges. And then we'll go around again so panelists can respond to what other people said. And then finally, we'll open it out to questions. We should have at least 20 or 25 minutes at the end for questions from the audience. So we'll begin with Dr. Geeta Venkatraman. So Geeta has an MA and a DPhil from Oxford University. She's currently Professor of Mathematics and Dean of Research and Consultancy at Ambedkar University in Delhi. She has interests in group theory as well as in mathematics education and in popularizing mathematics. And she's also interested in issues related to women in mathematics. And she's on the executive committee of Indian Women in Mathematics. And today, Geeta is mostly going to focus on the difficulties students face when they transition from school maths to college maths, though she will probably touch on many other topics as well. So thanks a lot, Geeta.
Thank you, Tulsi. I guess I can start now.
Yes,
somebody
please.
needs to keep an eye on the clock because as teachers, we suffer from the problem of not wanting to stop once we start. So please let me know.
Yeah, I suppose that is unfortunately my duty, so I will try and do that.
So good evening to everyone. I'm not able to see all of you, but I guess I'm hoping that you are able to see me. I wanted to thank the organizers of VMF 2020 for having a panel of this sort, because I really do believe that undergraduate education and undergraduate maths education in particular are key areas that our country needs to focus on, not just our country, but education systems worldwide. But there's a peculiar problem that we do face in India in the way we've structured our undergraduate curriculum. I'll touch upon that briefly during my conversation with you. But thanks to the organizers for putting together such a panel, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this panel. I just wanted to say that I have now for more than 25 years been engaged with teaching at the undergraduate level, starting from tutorials that I did as a grad student at Oxford. And then I spent a long stint in St. Stephen's College, where I primarily taught undergraduate students. And now I'm at Ambedkar University, Delhi, which is a new university, relatively new, I should say. It's completed 10 years now. And we have an undergraduate program in mathematics, a maths honors program. And then we also have research programs, MPhil and PhD programs. So what I'm going to say is, in a way, garnered from all these many years of being engaged with undergraduate maths education, in that sense of teaching maths to maths students as well as to non-maths students. I'm going to touch on a few points, but one key point that I want to mention, and I would hope that it gets all of you thinking about, is that undergraduate mathematics education must be seen as part of the larger schematic of undergraduate education. What I mean by this is that you cannot focus on mathematics education at the undergraduate level as a continuum in just mathematics. It has to be thought of much more holistically as part of what an undergraduate takes away from the system when they complete their degree. Before I go into more details, I mean, look at the kind of students who are entering into undergraduate education. They are very young, they've just finished school, they are 18 plus. Most of them have, our school system is such that it herds students into streaming even before they can know what those streams are: humanities, commerce, and sciences. And when they finish 12th, even before they finish 12th and 11th and 12th, they are already being made to decide what kinds of careers they want to enter into, what subjects they want to decide to study, and so on, without actually having any experience with that discipline at the higher levels, or even knowing what it entails. They're also moving from, so it's a very key period in their life, the undergraduate period. That's when they're taking first steps into being an adult. They're preparing for life. They're moving from a very fixed school routine to an apparently open and free system at the university level. And the other feature that you must remember is that for most people entering undergraduate education, it is a terminal degree for them. They are not going to continue with the subject or any other postgraduate program. I don't really have the figures, but from my experience with teaching mathematics per se, I would say that in a class of about 50 students, just about 10 would continue for some kind of a postgraduate program or so. And out of that 10, this is in a college like St. Stephen's, where I taught for many years, you would have at most 4 or 5 students who were doing mathematics honors, who were going to continue to study maths further at the next level. I mean, one doesn't even know whether they would continue to do research in mathematics, but this is the kind of basic situation that you have at the undergraduate level. However, when we design things for the undergraduate level, when we are talking about the syllabus or what we're going to teach them, I think all of us, I mean, me including at many times, we've thought about it primarily from the point of view of mathematics. So in a sense, what's happening is that we have our notion of what is required to be able to do research, to do a research degree in mathematics. That kind of decides on a certain syllabus at the master's level. There is the school syllabus in mathematics, which is decided by different methods, modes, and so you have school maths ending at a certain level, and you have masters in maths starting at a certain level, and it's like the undergraduate period has to somehow bridge the gap between these two things. And this is only from thinking about maths and thinking about the fact that everybody there may end up being going on to research in mathematics. So the first point I want to mention is the problems that we have in transitioning from school to college level maths also have to do with the way in which we have designed or we've thought about mathematics at the undergraduate level. We have not thought about it in keeping with general undergraduate education. We have mainly thought about it as the means to create people who will ultimately study PhDs. And look at the unfairness of it all. I mean, in a class, as I mentioned, of about 50 students, I would have just about 4 students thinking about continuing with mathematics. However, the syllabus that has been primarily made is for those 4 students and not necessarily for the larger set of students who have opted to do mathematics at the college level. So that's something that we should be looking at. And, how do we design? The key question in my mind is, how do we design an undergraduate maths experience which can both take care of the needs of mathematics as a discipline, as well as take care of undergraduate education, the needs that must be fulfilled via undergraduate education. If we have more time in the question answer session, I will take up issues on how this can be done. I just want to mention very briefly that at Ambedkar University, Delhi, we have tried to do this. We offer a lot of choice in the courses. There are core courses which every math student has to do. But when it comes to elective courses, they can choose from non-maths options as well. So here's a maths student. If they want to continue with maths, they can choose maths electives, which will help them for their masters. But if they don't want to continue with mathematics, they have the choice of taking things from elsewhere. They also have the choice of changing their major if they have started with maths and they find that it is not something that they are happy with. And this brings me to another question that we should be addressing, which is that when we have integrated master's programs or even integrated PhD programs without exit options at appropriate times, then it's really something where you're trapping a student and maybe dooming certain students to failures. So whenever you're thinking about creating integrated programs, and a lot of institutes have that, IISERs have them, they must think about the student who after 3 years does not want to continue with mathematics. What do they have to offer to such students? Now, coming back to, what happens when students come from school to college. School at the secondary level becomes extremely focused on cracking board exams and cracking various entrance exams. As a result, students end up learning methods largely, rather than they've not really thought about why the mathematics works, what mathematics that they're learning is about, or even delving at any deeper level into it. It's largely about learning methods to solve difficult integrals or trick problems and so on and so forth. On top of that, the board examination system also has what is called, a marking scheme. So unless you write things in a particular way, you won't get the marks. So a lot of time is spent in schools and so on in trying to teach the students how to do those, make sure those steps are in place. And this leads to a very, very strange situation when those students come into college, because they've come into college, not knowing what college maths is about. They have actually no experience that a lot of college maths is about why maths works. Why is it that it is so effective? We are delving into deeper concepts in everything. And the last time they met something like that was possibly when they did some kind of geometry in middle school or late middle school. And I'm not even sure whether now they still do theorems and proofs and riders like we used to do when we studied. But that's about the only place where they've really seen that kind of thing. And then they've come into college. You throw a very difficult integral at them, they will know all the tricks to solve it. But you ask them what a derivative is, they have no clue. So you're getting a set of students who've come into college who are, when you're about to hold your first test or something, the first thing they ask you is, ma'am, how do we write a particular answer? They're very worried that if they don't give the steps as was prescribed in the board exam type of thing, they're not going to get marks. So there's this concern about, so I end up telling them, look, you have to make an argument. As long as you are arguing correctly, it doesn't matter how you write it. There is no one fixed way of writing things, but that's something, it takes a long while to tell them that, to kind of get them used to thinking about mathematics, being able to communicate mathematics. They have to learn that writing mathematics is writing mathematics in a language. When they come to you initially in college, all you get is lines of symbols with no connectives between them, and that is supposed to be an argument of how they've solved something. The other thing that you find them doing a lot is proof by example. I mean, it takes a long while for you to again communicate to students that, what a proof really is. So being able to think about mathematics, write mathematics, communicate in mathematics, these are all skills which are very low or largely absent in students who are coming from school. Tulsi, how much time do I have?
If you could just wrap up in a minute or so, and then I think you raised some very important points which we can come back to in the discussion.
Yeah, so the point is that there is a vast divide between the way mathematics is tackled, particularly at the secondary school level, and the kind of things that is expected when students are coming into a maths degree at the university level. The other issue that I want to bring up here is, what is the maths that should be given to them at the undergraduate level? Along with it, what else do they need so that their need as, citizens going away with an undergraduate degree from the system are fulfilled? And that is something that we are really not thinking about at all. The other question I want to really raise as part of this transitioning is, why are we in a hurry to fast track researchers? I mean, I don't know about people now, but it took me a fairly long time before I decided that I wanted to do research in mathematics and choose mathematics as a career. But a lot of the newer institutions that have come up in the last 10 years or so, all of them, including the institutes which run undergraduate programs, all are single-minded with one, fast track a person, an 18-year-old who probably does not even know what they want to do, to, okay, they are the ones who are going to do PhDs in maths and then continue to mathematics career. Now, a few of them may be wonderful examples of people who could do that. But I would argue that even in their case, they should have the experience of what it means to be an undergraduate in a liberal education rather than having a fast track. The last thing that I want to say is that we also as mathematicians ought to be thinking about how we teach maths, or how maths should be communicated to non-maths people. The bulk of the world comes with very bad experiences from school. They hate maths, and sometimes that hate transfers to, not knowing how to deal with a mathematician. And as mathematicians, as people doing mathematics, we are also living in this real world. We are part of society. Any job that we do, we have to work with others. And I think it's time that people involved in designing curriculum, designing syllabi, creating undergraduate programs should be thinking with a larger perspective and thinking about how people coming through the system, even if they go on to do PhDs in mathematics, can actually live as citizens in this world and actually have a sense of many things that are happening around us. Last point, COVID-19, I think all of us have encountered online teaching, and for me it was an abrupt, one day, I was teaching in class and some 10 days later one had to start teaching online, and I didn't have the equipment available, and it's really, I think, I don't know about others, they can probably come in on this, but as a person, when I teach mathematics, there is something very special about writing on the board. When you write on the board and you're talking and you're looking at your students, you're explaining things, you're discussing it with them, I think the slow speed at which that happens, it really helps students to understand concepts. And I'm not sure how well online teaching, particularly if we don't have access to such things, works. And also assessments, that's a big issue. Maybe these are things that will come up later. And with this, I will ask Tulsi to take over and hand it over to the next panelist. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for that, Geeta. I think there are some points which you raised which are extremely important, which hopefully some of the other panelists will be covering too, other things which we should return to in the discussion. So the next panelist who will be speaking is Dr. V.V. Acharya from Fergusson College, Pune. In fact, he's the head of the maths department at Fergusson College. His master's and PhD are from Pune University, and he has 28 years of teaching experience. And over 28 years, he's also been very deeply involved in activities related to the Maths Olympiad. So he's been the regional coordinator for Maharashtra and Goa, the deputy leader for the Indian team at the International Maths Olympiad in both 2003 and 2004. And he was an observer for the same in 2013. He's also conducted various training programs for the Olympiad across the country and written and edited a book for the Maths Olympiad called An Excursion in Mathematics. In addition to this, Dr. Acharya is a life member of the Deccan Education Society and a trustee of Bhaskaracharya Pratisthana. So we are very happy to have Dr. Acharya with us today. He's going to be mostly speaking about challenges that we encounter when teaching large classes. And some of this is also going to be relevant about the difficulties that people will face teaching during this pandemic. So Dr. Acharya, please take on.
Good evening. I thank all the organizers for inviting me for this panel discussion. I thank Dr. Geeta for saying some of the issues which are being faced in this entire process of learning. There will be some common points between me and Geeta. One of the important issue is pre-knowledge of the student. And what we want to do is we get some students who have passed their 12th standard, and we want to teach them something. This is desired quite often by UGC. So UGC tells that, such and such things should be taught to all the students. And pre-knowledge to this of these students is something which we cannot really decide because, for example, in my college, we have about 400 and odd students in first year BSc. They come from different backgrounds from across the country, and everybody has his or her strong points in mathematics, quite often restricted only to problem solving. So that is one point. And the point number two here is language. So some of them have studied in Marathi medium, some of them, so in the regional languages, Bengali or whatever. And when they come to the first year BSc, they have to learn everything in English, and that becomes an issue. Moreover, the 11th, 12th standard structure in our entire country is broken to pieces. I don't know how we can join it, because everybody wants to write some entrance exam and want to get good score there. And that creates an issue, because one doesn't know what has to be written, how to read, how to write, but we know how to write on the exam. So basically, all these things are part of rote learning. It's you learn something and then go to the examination hall and vomit it. It's nothing different than that. So the point is that, going back to the first point, we should understand that in education, we should concentrate what the student knows and where we want to lead them. So from known to unknown. And in huge classes, this is difficult. In a small class, you can possibly take some 2-3 tests, but when the number is huge, it becomes almost impossible. Secondly, this forces us to develop the methodology to identify what students know and what they do not know. And the most important thing is when we say that the students know, what do you mean by they know? So they quite often know how to, as Geeta said, that they know how to integrate, but what is integration is not known to them. So quite often I ask a question that what is the limit of sin x upon x? So they say that the answer is 1. And then I say, oh, where is x tending to? Then they say that, oh, you didn't tell us that. So this realization comes in a different way. The second aspect is, if you know that certain problem can be done in one way, can you do it in some other way? School geometry writers offer an excellent facility to do this. But unfortunately, not much is done. Quite often, the syllabi of school is diluted, and this creates lots of jumps or gaps in education. So for example, the first gap which I can see is going from 4th standard to 5th standard. Then the next jump comes from 8th standard to 9th standard, where quite often that's this place where the notion of proof is introduced. The next jump comes when the student goes to 11th standard. And the major jump which comes is in first year BSc. As one of the participants suggested, that in first year BSc, what happens is the maths which is being taught till 12th standard is problem-based, and all of a sudden it becomes a proof-based mathematics. And this creates lots of problems. Students do not know how to read mathematics, they just know how to solve mathematics. So this is my personal experience also, that in the school, what I used to do was you read the exercise set, solve it, but never read the entire textbook. So even now in good colleges across the country, if you ask this question that read a mathematics textbook, that becomes a challenge for most of the students. They do not know how to ask questions, and partly the reason for that is rote learning. And there are several questions. So for example, do the students ask these questions? What, where, when, why, how, who? And I think this is the place where we as educators have to work a lot. Quite often, there is an issue here that we are highly qualified, but untrained teachers. Some of us take efforts to get the training. You know that how to do mathematics, as Geeta said that, yes, we know how to write thesis, how to write down the research papers, but how to educate the student, that's a skill. And in some countries across the globe, there is a special training program that Okay, you have finished your PhD, you work with somebody for a year or two, and after that you can teach. But in India, this problem is there that you can finish your MSc, you can then write down NET set. If you have cleared NET and if there is a job, you will get the job. If you are lucky, of course. But there is no way where it is being taught. How do you teach higher level mathematics? We have training programs for school teachers where they do D.Ed or B.Ed, but nothing for high school, for university teachers or for college teachers. There are various issues after this, and these issues are about the assignments and their evaluation. Quite often we give the assignments to the students, we evaluate them, but the later part is missing. Who will do the analysis where our student is good or our student is bad? And if some place the student is lagging behind, how do you improve the students, or how do you improve your teaching style, or how do you change your teaching style? So these are the issues. Quite often students tell me that, we have a difficulty, but we do not know how to ask the question. This is partly responsibility of us to make sure that students come out of their zone and are comfortable with us. Sometimes bright students, of course, help the weak students, but there are issues in this entire process. There are, in the current scenario, there is a pandemic across the globe, and we have issues here. One of the most important issue is teacher-student connection for fresh students. As Dr. Geeta pointed out, there is already a fear about mathematics. I quite often call it as a mathophobia. Because of the mathophobia, people are afraid of talking with the teacher. They think that, oh, this person is math teacher, so how do I connect with him? During the pandemic, this scenario is going to be more difficult, especially for fresh students. The person doesn't know who is their teacher and how do I communicate with such a person. Similarly for the teacher also will face lots of issues in this. There are several other issues which are there. One of the important issues is network connectivity. We have our students who come from small villages in Maharashtra as well as from other parts of the country where internet has not reached, and somewhere on the top of a tree or some such place they may get the signal. How do you communicate in this scenario? There are other issues like electricity, especially during the monsoon. This will be a real issue. One of the important point is live feedback. In the class, when we are teaching, if student doesn't understand something, she may ask a question or he may ask a question. So we can go back and forth. When we are giving these lectures online, there is no live feedback. I gave about 20 lectures during this pandemic, and very rarely students ask me a question. And therefore, it becomes a real difficult scenario because teachers don't understand. And this is not only my personal feeling. Other day I was hearing a webinar where people from IMSC, ISIS were speaking, and they also said that, oh, live feedback is missing. So I believe that the pandemic scenario will make really a difficult thing about this live feedback. Instruments there are about 40% of the students who are learning in Ferguson College who have issues with these instruments. I do not know what will happen for a smaller college where Android phone or tab or laptop or desktop is missing. Then in this case, how do you teach the student online? And especially when the classroom is big. Another issue is screen duration, how long you can teach. So for example, in third year BSc students, in our regular class, we teach them for about a period of 6 hours every day. Screen duration for such a long time is a challenge from the student's perspective. I think this will be a big issue. Yet another issue here is the freedom to learn from the experts. I believe that by using this online methodology, students will not get the freedom to learn from the teacher of his or her choice. Quite often it will happen that the parents may not leave the child to the places where pandemic is in at highest level at this point of time. And choice of the learning platform is an issue because some teachers will use possibly Zoom, somebody will use Big Biblioton, somebody will use Microsoft Teams, somebody will use some different platform. So choice of the learning platform will create a problem. And most importantly, Tulsi, how much time I have?
I think you're running a little over, but please feel free to finish and we'll try and reorganize the time. So yeah. I don't want to interrupt you here.
Yeah. So but I'm almost towards the end. One of the last thing which I have written here is in Devanagari, which is in Sanskrit, which says that Acharyat Padamadatte Padam Shishya Swamedaya Padam Sab Brahmacharibhya Padam Kalakramena. So about the literal meaning is that you can learn about 25% of the study from your teacher, 25% you can learn on your own, 25% you learn from your colleagues, and 25% of the knowledge you learn over a period of time. I believe that in this scenario, all these aspects will be taught cannot be used by the students because he doesn't have a direct contact with the teacher. He has to spend more time for learning on his own. He possibly doesn't know who are his colleagues, and that will really create a problem for overall understanding of the subject. Possibly, we will have a more discussion in the question answer sessions. I again thank the organizers for giving me an opportunity to participate in this session. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot for that, Dr. Acharya. I think the last couple of lines that you put up especially really resonated with me. So I am going to make a suggestion. We are running over, but I also think maybe it was the original suggestion to the panelists to speak for just 8 minutes was not very realistic. So what I'm going to suggest is that Fozia and Amber, maybe you can also spend maybe 10 to 12 minutes, and then rather than an internal discussion, we can go directly to questions from the students. Then there's not going to be so much time pressure. I hope that's okay with everyone. So the next speaker is Dr. Fozia Qazi. She's a professor of mathematics and the department head at the Islamic University of Science and Technology. She has a PhD in maths from Syracuse University and has worked as an academic in the US for many years. And after this, she returned to Kashmir in 2009, since when she's been with the Islamic University. So Fozia was instrumental in starting a job-oriented maths program at the Islamic University, as well as conducting maths outreach programs for school children, maths festivals, teacher training programs, and so on. And her current research also involves studying symmetries in shawls and other traditional patterns of Kashmir. Fozia is going to talk about her very unique and difficult experiences in the last year teaching maths at a time of political turmoil in Kashmir, and maybe also touch a little upon the further problems caused by the pandemic. So, Fozia, would you like to begin? Fozia, I think you're muted.
Am I audible now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you, Tulsi, for the introduction and for the invitation to be part of this panel. I will focus primarily on my experiences of teaching in Kashmir over the last 11 years. But a lot of what I'm going to talk about may be unique to Kashmir, but it is also a question of access. It is also a question of having different student groups who may or may not have access to the same resources that everybody else does. So what were the challenges that we have faced over the last 11 years? I'll sort of highlight some of them. But when we started the math program, this was in 2009 at Islamic University, we had primarily two objectives. And one was that we wanted the program to be job-oriented. Employability was one of the issues. And it addresses what Geeta had earlier talked about, that when we think of undergraduate programs, we tend to think of all the students wanting to do a PhD. So the syllabus is often designed in that way. But we wanted at Islamic University for the course to be more job-oriented and not just be a regular, what was taught in most other colleges locally. And so we started an actuarial mathematics program. But the other objective was that there has to be some flexibility. Flexibility in terms of, again, Geeta touched upon this issue also, that you have an 18-year-old who comes into the university or the college for an undergraduate program. At that time, they may not really know what they're interested in doing further. And so we wanted, at the end of the 3-year program, we wanted the student to have the flexibility to either just go for a job or go for a postgraduate program in not just mathematics. They could do a statistics, economics, or a few other options. But we also wanted to reach out to the student who maybe catches the math bug in those 3 years, which is a student who may want to go for a research program later on in mathematics. And Amber is familiar with the sort of the early discussions we've had, because Amber has been on our board of studies, and we had a lot of discussions, and we designed the program keeping these objectives in mind. And at that time, the challenges that we thought we were going to face were the challenges that the panelists that came before me have sort of touched upon. You think of math phobia, you think of the level of preparation of students who are coming in from school education into a college or a university. They may lack the basics, sort of understanding of the fundamentals of some of the basic concepts. These are some universal issues or challenges that you think you're going to face as a math teacher. So the other challenge was if you think of, and again, Geeta already touched upon it, is that students who are coming from 10+2 come from a system where there is a lot of focus on exams. And so education tends to be test-centric, getting the answer right, the correct answer that will get you the points that you want, rather than sort of understanding of the concepts. So those were some of the issues that we thought. So again, pertaining mostly to teaching of mathematics at an undergraduate level. The other challenge, which was going to be important for us, because our university is located in a rural area. The campus is outside of the main urban area. So our catchment area is mostly rural. We do get urban students also, but some of the issues which are unique to students from rural areas, which is that their access and exposure to technology, for example, was often limited. When you talk to teachers, I mean, I have talked to teachers during teacher training programs, for example. More often than not, the teachers who are teaching in rural schools often talk about the issues of a person who may not have a math background has to teach mathematics to school children because there is non-availability of teachers, who are math teachers in rural areas. So that obviously has an effect on the quality of teaching. Also, when the students from the rural areas come to university, sometimes their sort of introduction to the university is different than the experiences of a student from an urban area. So we were sort of thinking we need to have certain courses in our first semester which would help the students who came from backgrounds where they didn't have access to technology necessarily, sort of ease them into the program. Having said that, and this is 2009, and now it is 2020, and if I sort of look back on this and look at the challenges that have been most critical for us over here, and this is not specific to Islamic University, but specific to our region, our main challenge has not been teaching of mathematics. Our main challenge has been basically teaching, because there is such a regular disruption of classes in our part of the world that the issues that I thought were going to be important were not as important, in the sense that some of the problems that Geeta was talking about, in some sense, is almost a luxury when I look at it now. I wish that this was all that we had to face, that we have students who have whose experiences basically come from rote learning in high schools. It is true, we do have those students, but we don't get to teach them as regularly as we would like to. Just to give you a few examples of what has happened, and Tulsi, you just mentioned that we have had a lot of challenges since or in the past year. But the fact is that it's not just 1 year. It's been sort of consistently going on for almost a decade now, on and off. We've had 2010, where we had extended sort of shutdowns in 2010. And we had 2012, we had 2016, and then just to give you an idea of what has happened in the last year, our autumn semester usually starts beginning of August and ends in December. So we have 5 months in the autumn semester. So last year, in 2019, during those 5 months, we could only have roughly about 20 days of classes. We could not have online classes because internet was shut down also. So imagine 20 days of classes instead of 5 months. We just finished exams by the end of June, but those were not exams for the spring semester. Those were exams for the autumn semester. So when most of you are actually getting ready for the next autumn semester and next admissions and bringing in new students, we've just started our spring semester. Literally 1 week or 10 days ago, we started our spring semester, which was supposed to have started in March. This is one of the problems. The other problem is, even when you do talk to the students, even when you are there in person in a classroom, even for 20 days or 10 days, the students are traumatized. There is with all the, the problems that our region has faced, there is a lot of mental stress that our students face. So we as teachers, as their advisors, often, if you have an advising session, that may not be just about mathematics, that may be about the trauma that the student is facing, the stress of the sort of being and living day in and day out in a conflict zone. Another issue, which most of you are familiar with, that we have faced is the issue of lack of internet. We have, since August, I think for almost 7 months or so, we had internet shut down. I think I wrote it down somewhere. 2G network was started on the 3rd week of January, roughly. So between August and 3rd week of January, we didn't have any internet access. And even in January, you could only access certain quote unquote whitelisted websites. So teaching sort of online, like on Zoom or whatever else, was not possible. And it's only in March that that restriction was lifted. But we still, to this day, only have 2G internet access, which is majority of the students who may have a smartphone, who may have access to some sort of technology to be able to join a Zoom class or Google Meet or whatever it is, are doing that on a 2G connection. There are very few people, primarily in the urban areas, who may have a broadband connection, but if you look at the speed of the broadband these days, it is less than 2G sometimes. So I have a broadband at home, but sometimes I have to shut it off. I mean, the Wi-Fi I have to shut off because it's so slow. Then I use the 2G network. So the network itself is an issue. Access to information, access to online classes becomes difficult for students who are, and in some sense, it has been an equalizer in the sense that whether it is urban or whether it is rural student, the access to the internet is often very limited for both of them. Those are some of the major challenges. Now, how have we try to overcome some of those challenges in the last few months? What we've done, for example, I remember in 2010, we had an extended shutdown, but it was done in a way where internet was still on. So we could, through email, talk to our students and send them notes. And then whenever we were able to meet with them in person, we would sort of go over that. That was impossible in August because everything, as I said, even the phones and internet was shut down. But what did work is that once the phones started working and once we were able to connect with our students, whether on the phone or in person, we were able to arrange some internships for them. They have an internship requirement. And this happened in many places, not just in our university, that the time period which was normally would be utilized for classes during the semester was utilized for internships because normally the internships would happen in the winter months. So we sort of switched and then were able to again restart classes in February. And then we had, I think, about a month of classes, month and a half of classes between mid-February and I think it was March 23rd or so when the lockdown happened, the COVID lockdown. So we have had, I think, about 50 days of classes when we should have had at least 10 months of classes. So those are some of the issues. We have become, I think, in some sense, counselors also for our students. We have to not just teach them mathematics, we have to also counsel them, become their psychological counselors. It's difficult. I don't have all the answers. We have facing a lot of challenges in terms of connectivity, in terms of access also, especially for rural students. One of the things that Dr. Acharya was talking about was that, the teaching platform that a particular teacher may like. And I just had 2 days ago, I had a student call and say that, such and such teacher is using this platform, but I'm in a very remote area and that platform doesn't work for me. So those issues are very real and they happen on a daily basis for us. I think do I have more time, or I can sort of talk about it a little later? I mean, if there are any questions. Tulsi?
Yeah, maybe we can pause now, go to Amber, and then return to questions. So yeah, thanks a lot for sharing your experiences, Fozia. I think some of the things you described of, the difference between planning and reality, and about having to deal not just with maths, but the other concerns that students have, something we all have to face, but what you've described is at an unimaginable scale. So it's really admirable to hear about it. So we'll now move on to our fourth panelist, Dr. Amber Habib. Amber is a professor of mathematics at Shiv Nadar University. And before this, he was at the Mathematical Sciences Foundation and at St. Stephen's College. Amber did an integrated MS in Maths from IIT Kanpur, and he has a PhD from the University of California at Berkeley. His research interests are in Lie theory and mathematical finance. So Amber has contributed to the curricula and the activities of several universities and also to the NCERT, and he's been regularly involved with the MTTS program. And he's interested in how mathematics education at the school and college level can be made more interesting or more fulfilling through multiple ways. So projects showing the link with other disciplines and so on. And today, Amber is mostly going to focus on how undergraduate students can be exposed to and prepared for different careers in maths, both the curricular aspects as well as other things. So Amber, would you like to start?
Sure. Okay. Yeah, I've been doing a lot of this online teaching, and the thing that is most awkward is that you end up seeing your own face a lot of the time. And one way out of that is to share the screen and show something else instead. So let me do that. Okay. All right. So as this cover slide shows, I did not actually have a very clear idea what I can do in 10 minutes. I couldn't come up with a snappy title, so I made a diagram instead. But let's start. There's a few things to talk about. The people before me have said many things, but there's still a bit more to add to that. Let me start. Okay. So the thing that I've been thinking about for this is, what do students want to do after their undergraduate education, and what we can do to facilitate that and to guide that. And maybe let us start by looking at some of the things that are out there where mathematics is used. I mean, there are basically two topics one could have used today, Google and COVID, in terms of something that impacts us constantly. So I've gone with Google, so I thought something more pleasant. And let's see what happens if you type VMF 2020 into Google today. At least if you do that from Delhi, it's very interesting because the first two sites are, the first two links that you get are the ones that I want. But then there is also something for a vending machine fair in China that's also called VMF, and There are many, many others. And if you look at this, it claims that it generated 1,270,000 results, and it took 0.23 seconds to do that. Plus, out of those results, it selected these few as the ones it thought that I would be most interested in. Okay. All right. So clearly, a lot is happening behind the scenes here. Let's see what that could be. Let's just see what Google says about itself. All right. So they claim that they store information, about hundreds of billions of web pages in their index, and that this takes over 100,000 terabytes of space. They handle 3 billion searches every day. And every time they do a search, it involves various activities like the ones mentioned here. They have to look at the words of the query, the type of the pages, the reputation of the pages, and so forth. Okay. Also, Google shares with us a little bit about what they use to do all this. Now, of course, Google is more than just the Google search. And here are various things that they say that they use in what they do. They use linear algebra to rank pages. They use machine learning for their spam filters, time series to model the number of searches and users. Income, I guess, is related to their ad income, right? So they're modeling that. Signal processing for their voice recognition components. Geometry is used by Google Earth. Graph theory is used by Google Maps. Game theory is used by them again. For the auctions of their ads. Okay. All right. So now these topics are, are kind of undergraduate or at the boundary of undergraduate and graduate mathematics, right? So it's at least certainly possible for an undergraduate student to have various skills in these directions when they graduate and be eligible to work on these things. And also, these are topics that are not just of relevance to Google. These are also the things that you would use for a wide variety of other applications of mathematics. Okay. Okay. So that's one. That a lot of mathematics serious mathematics is finding use in many directions, and undergraduate students can get off to a good start in learning this mathematics. Okay. That's not the final word on this, but let's take that as a start. I'll revisit this, but before I do that, let me show you some examples of what people might do following an undergraduate degree or a master's degree in mathematics. Okay. So this first example is a classmate of mine from long ago, right? Both of us went to an integrated 5-year program. Then he did a PhD in maths, he did a postdoc, he was working in algebraic geometry. Sometime in his 30s, after in fact a very prestigious postdoc, he decided that was not the life for him. He went for an MA in finance, and now he's what's called a quant analyst on Wall Street, and he's working for an investment company, and he's working on numerical solutions of stochastic partial differential equations. Okay. Okay. The next are some students from my St. Stephen's College days. They did BA in maths there and followed it up with a master's and PhD, and again going in different directions. One became a risk manager. One first became an assistant professor in a maths department, but now is a data analyst for an insurance company. Another one followed up with a master's in financial maths and now works as portfolio manager for an energy company. Okay. All right. These are sort of colleagues of mine, and I thought I would include their paths as well, starting with their undergraduate degrees, followed by master's and PhD, and then postdocs are more standard. The first one, after his postdoc, he actually joined industry and worked on medical technology, specifically medical imaging, before deciding to come back to academia and becoming a faculty member jointly in computer science and mathematics. Okay. And these two are students of mine from my current university. So after their bachelor's in mathematics, both of them went for business analytics kind of master's programs. Well, one of them did, and then has worked as an analyst for an airlines and so on. And the other one actually took up a job as a business analyst for an investment company. But after a few years of traveling the world and doing that, she decided that she needs to know more maths, and is just last year joined a master's in applied maths. Okay, and the last one is a little different. This is, sorry. Okay, so this is a student who actually had done a BTech, I think electrical engineering, and wanted a career in robotics. And when he started applying or looking at what it needs to become, to go for higher studies in robotics at good universities in the US, he found that there's a lot of maths you need to know which had not been taught to him. So then he actually came and did an MSc in maths at my university. And for instance, I ended up teaching him a course on geometry from the book by Kumresan and Santanam, Expedition in Geometry. So it's sort of classical stuff, projective geometry and so on. And in fact, that became very crucial to him in the internship that he did in robotics after finishing his master's in maths. And then he did a master's in engineering with a specialization in robotics and so on. So what he really needed was some classical geometry, some differential geometry, some numerical techniques, some game theory, some graph theory, all right? And so that is what he got from the master's, and then he was able to return to his engineering career, and he is now actually a robotics engineer for a company. All right, so what is, I think also in the chat, people are asking a little bit about, maybe they're feeling a bit lost about what direction they're supposed to be moving in, what is it that they should focus on right now. And one thing I wanted to highlight from this slide was how, there are many opportunities. You can do different things at different points of life. You can revisit your decisions and you can change them, and you can still continue and have really productive and interesting careers. Yeah. Okay, so I think what one is seeing is, okay, so there's the standard track to academia, which is bachelor's, master's, PhD, but you could leave off at any stage and go get a job doing something else, which I've just written as industry as a catch-all for anything outside academia. And you could do this after bachelor's or master's or PhD, and you could do this and you could come back to the academic stream, right? So the people that I was showing you are showing different paths of, through this sort of graph. Okay. So now the bachelor is the starting point here, right? So therefore, the task at the undergraduate level is to lay, on the one hand, a common foundation that could be useful for any of these potential paths, but then also have enough choice built into it to support these diverse possibilities. All right, so what does this require? Now, one problem that happens when you are creating a curriculum is that every one of us has a certain idea of what we consider to be necessary to a maths education, right? And then a curriculum often simply becomes the union of all the things that the different contributing people consider to be necessary. And you get a large number of compulsory courses, right? And so I think the very first thing one has to do is one has to take an opposite approach and in some sense go for the intersection rather than the union, and be extremely restrained in what you consider to be core and something that everybody should know, right? And you have to do this so that you can create a variety of elective courses so that people can start exploring different directions, right? And can move back and forth and can start that during their undergraduate education. On the other hand, this should not just be random. If this is going to be really constructive and help them in any particular direction, then these courses sort of have to come in packages. They should form specializations and so on, right? So groups of courses that a student can take as electives and explore different directions. Okay. It's also extremely important. I think Geeta pointed out that one should not look, at the maths education as the student doing a maths degree, and we just look at the maths part. We have to look at the whole package. And so one has to allow significant space for non-major courses, and one has to coordinate with other departments. And that is a very tricky thing, that you have to coordinate with other departments so that your students can go and take courses there and their students course. Apart from just the courses, this mixing of the students is extremely important. So one problem we have had is that if we expose our math students early to the things that we think are necessary for mathematicians, they tend to get isolated from other students. Okay, and that has various implications for them. To handle the maths program, they need to be strong, not just mathematically, but as human beings, as people who can take on stress and who can deal with it and who can solve life problems. So they need to know. I mean, they need a variety of social interaction as well, and the curriculum somehow has to provide and has to facilitate that. Okay. Now, students enter an undergraduate maths program, right, with various levels of clarity about their eventual career. Some come in with very clear sort of picture, right? So I might get 2 or 3 students every year who join and say, where is the course in algebraic topology? Why are you telling me about mathematical reasoning? So there are students like that. And there are also students who come but with different interests. So there are also students nowadays. In fact, a big thing is that everyone is hearing about big data and machine learning. So there are students who will come and who will say that, well, I've joined a maths program because I've heard that maths is essential for machine learning. And so how soon, will you teach me the necessary maths, and can I take the necessary computer science courses? And it's not always fluff. Some of them, in fact, are quite serious about it, are quite good at it. And so it's a new challenge to see how to facilitate this desire that people have nowadays. So what they want to do, there are different levels of clarity. What relevance maths has to what they want to do, they're generally not very clear. For instance, someone says that I want to do research, okay, but right, what do they really know of what it means or what it means to do research in mathematics? But that is what they have, they have seen some options and this is what they have picked out. And they come in with different levels of commitment. For instance, what I see is that students who join engineering are willing to take much more for granted. So they are much more patient in terms of, okay, the engineering school is telling us to do this, so we will do this. Okay, what's interesting about students joining maths is that much earlier they start questioning. I mean, they're not very patient with their teachers. They want justification. Why are you putting me through all this? And it's an interesting challenge trying to answer that. Okay. So what happens is that, when we design the curriculum, we tend to, maybe have a few sort of what we consider typical or even ideal students in mind, and we plan a curriculum for them. The students we actually get are much, much more varied than we have planned for. Okay. And so many things matter beyond content. Okay. One problem is that most discussions about curriculum are about content, right? What should I teach them? What sequence should I teach them in? What book should I use, etc., right? And even what I've been saying so far has been mainly about that. Okay, but there are other things, many intangibles to take care of. Students have different learning styles, right? So the way I teach works for some students, does not work for other students. When I was a teaching assistant for the first time, and I would see how so the university that I was in, you had large courses. You might have 10, maybe 20 sections, tutorial sections to a course. You might have 10 TAs. And the students had a couple of weeks to decide which tutorial they wanted to be in. Okay. So over the first couple of years, and this was kind of deflating for me at first, because what I saw was that, my tutorial sections were full, but the students who were really, into maths and were ambitious and so on, they were not coming to my tutorials. Somehow I was attracting the ones who were sinking and who wanted sort of a hand, who sort of wanted, someone that they thought would help them get through. So those students were attracted to my tutorials. I was not so happy about that at first, but eventually I, took a more positive sort of look at it and said, yes, that's very important too. Okay. So different things attract different students, and even when teaching the same course. For instance, I had a student for part of my linear algebra course, she was very engaged, and for part of it, she was not coming to class at all. It took a while before she figured out, what was happening to her, and a further time before she told me about what had happened. Right? So wherever there was some sort of pictures to be drawn, diagrams, and I was, talking about pictures, then she was engaged and she was actually very good. And when it became purely formal and I was saying, here are axioms, let's manipulate them, she could not tolerate that at all, I think. And right, so she would just then stop coming to class while that was going on. Okay. Right. Students come in with different levels of confidence and ambition. And so, and that's very important, that somehow one has to get to know these things early. Okay. I teach something and someone doesn't understand, someone will respond with a question, right? And will get their problem sorted out. And someone else will just say, oh, this is not for me, and they will give up. Okay. Maybe if I can somehow sense that this is happening to them and I can intervene, right, and have some time with them, then I can, solve this problem for them and we can move forward. But if I don't find out, then there's a lost student to deal with. Okay. So faculty's ability to advise and counsel, okay, that's a very crucial component apart from the curriculum. And I think this is a serious problem. And my fourth point is a bit similar. I think faculty are in some sense too uniform. Okay, and we need much more diverse faculty. When we are talking, we like to talk to students and say, there are many possibilities and you should be open-minded and you should explore and you should find your passion. And we have all these nice things to say to them. But ultimately, if we test them all in the same way for the same things and we have very similar expectations, then that is contradictory. But the way institutions are at present, the way departments are, the way we hire, we tend to also, the same way that I talked about having an ideal student in mind, we typically have an ideal faculty member in mind. And we tend to hire similar people. Maybe in maths, there is still a bit more diversity. We tend to be a bit weird, and that automatically creates a certain diversity. But still, this is an issue. And what I find in my department and my programs is that, different students are gravitating to different faculty members, and it's not always due to the content, due to the specific courses they are teaching. It's their way of being, it's their way of talking, it's the things they talk about, it's the things that they value, the things that, the way that they nurture students, right? The students from different backgrounds and students with different likings are drawn to different faculty members. And so diversity amongst the faculty is extremely important. Okay? And so when we think about all these things, the transition from school to college, careers, et cetera, the faculty component, what we are like is something that I think doesn't get addressed. Hiring is individual. There are many factors, and we are much more uniform than we ought to be. All right. I think I'm going to stop here. Yes, that was the last slide. Okay. And so we can move to the audience. I think the chat box has been pretty active, so I think we can pick out many things from there.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Amber, for that. Yes, I think we have about 10 minutes left, so I think we can move quickly on to questions from the audience. And as you mentioned, there's been a very rich discussion happening in the chat window, and many of the questions the panelists have already responded to. I'm going to use my dictatorial powers and ask if anyone wants to respond to what I thought was a very nice question from Gautam Varali. So I'm just going to read this out, and anyone who wants to respond, please do that. So how would one reconcile the fact that for many students, the BSc, BA is their terminal degree, with the fact that teaching such things as critical thinking, analytical things, good citizenship, etc., takes time. So universities, after all, have to impart a large set of skills in a very short period of time to students who will not be in the university after completing their BSc, BA. Would anyone like to respond to that?
Maybe I can say something first and then the others. Yeah, I mean, the whole issue comes back to how would you design syllabi at the undergraduate level, say in a mathematics honors program. You do want to have critical thinking and all the other skills that a student needs to develop through their undergraduate days. And you also want them to gain enough knowledge in mathematics for the degree to be called a maths honors degree. And plus it has to handle students coming from varied knowledge bases into the undergraduate program. And they also want to leave the undergraduate program to take up various different careers, including the path which would go into higher levels of study in mathematics. The only way you can do that is to have a structure where there is a lot of choice for the student. The UGC choice-based curriculum is actually a misnomer. There is really, by the time it's implemented by the institutions, there's really no choice. So I mean, I'll just give a typical example of what we do in AUD, and of course, that's not necessarily the best way to proceed, but a maths honors students has to compulsorily do 12 maths courses. And there's no choice really in that aspect of it. But to graduate, they need to do something like 24 courses. 4 of these tend to be of the type which are critical thinking and so on and so forth. They have some element of choice in it and there's some compulsoriness built in it. They call it kind of foundation courses. Then you have these core courses, but that still leaves space. So for 8 courses, where if a student wants to continue with mathematics, then they pick the higher level maths courses, which will lead them in that direction. But say a student is not interested in continuing with mathematics, but wants to say, enter into journalism, wants to do a bit of history or political science, they can do that, or pick up languages, they can do that along with doing a maths honors. They can also do economics, for example. So the freedom, so there's a core that you think which is essential because your degree is also called a maths honors degree. But at the same time, around it, you build elements of choice and keep some kind of a foundational basket which handles these things. I think Amber and Fauzia and all have also probably done that in their universities.
Yes, I'll briefly talk about our program, which is again, what I said earlier is that one of the objectives was employability. So assuming that a student who isn't necessarily going to go for a postgraduate program, so we designed it with that in mind, and also we brought in a lot of flexibility in terms of electives, especially after their sort of in their 4th, 5th, and 6th semesters. They can take elective courses. Our students, just to give you an example, we have had students who've found jobs right after bachelor's, especially in the banking and finance industry. We've had students who've gone on to do PhDs, either in pure mathematics or in even actuarial mathematics. It's based primarily on the electives that they take. Some of them are more sort of theoretical math courses, if you want to do a PhD, or if you want to do mathematics. We've had students who've done business courses afterwards, who have gone to do masters in economics or PhDs, statistics, applied math. So not history, or there isn't that much flexibility in terms of them wanting to then do social science. They can, if the program is just requires a bachelor's degree, but they do have specialization within the 3 years of going into business, economics, math, statistics, actuarial sciences, or just stopping at the bachelor's level and being able to find a job. We've had students who work, a lot of our students are working as actuarial analysts. Just after a bachelor's degree, they took the actuarial exams and were able to find good jobs. But the point was, the main thing was you give them flexibility, especially sort of second year onwards, fourth, fifth, and sixth semester. We have done the same for our postgraduate program, which is actuarial statistics, but there are also students who want to do more statistics and less actuarial part of it. So there is flexibility there as well in terms of electives. We have also had one important point that I want to say is that I was talking about students, rural areas who don't necessarily have access to technology or exposure to certain things. We have incorporated courses on technology into our programs, even language, especially English language, so that they can catch up.
Yeah, thanks for that, Fuzia. Dr. Acharya or Amber, would you like to come in for, say, 90 seconds each, either responding to this question or something else?
Okay, do I have a stopwatch? All right. Yeah, so again, when you say, how do we impart different skills to students, when it comes to things like critical thinking and so forth, and, how to be a good citizen, one thing, as Gautam sort of said and undercut his own question, is, does it really matter anymore? But if we take the first question, then I think, again, what I would say is, of course, in terms of courses, there are things that you can do, but it's the overall experience. So if you want a math student to have some understanding of what it is to be a good citizen, then there must be something else going on in the life of your university where they can experience that. Not sure that it's fair to put the burden of that on the real analysis instructor and so forth, right? So do they have a role, do they have a say in what happens in your program, right? So can they influence the courses that you teach? Can they dispute that with you? Can they learn how to do that, right? In the sense, that's also a skill, how to negotiate and how to, put forward your desires, how to learn to express and communicate them. Do we give them an opportunity to do that, right? Are they represented in your committees? If they get into a fight with some university authority, what do you do, right? So I think these are the things, and if you really want, so this is what is involved in really saying that we will equip them to be good citizens. If you come to narrower things like, what are the things about understanding what a proof is and so on, then I don't think that calls for a lot of time. It doesn't matter that a BSc is just 3 years. What it took for me to learn really what a proof is, to whatever extent I've learned it took maybe 2 courses. One was a philosophy course and one was a real analysis course, where the instructor had a way of teaching where he would simply put conjectures on the board and would get the whole class to vote one by one on whether they thought it was true or false. Okay. So all the time you were faced with, Mr. Habib, is this true? Is this false? If it is true, you give a proof. If it's false, give a counter example. And a whole semester of that, and you are sort of sorted out. I don't think, I don't think that my understanding of what is a proof has particularly developed beyond what happened in that course. Okay, so that's what I think about this question. One, if it's a narrower viewpoint of the technical things and what you need to do well in maths, then it doesn't necessarily take time, but it does take some intense experience. And the other, if it's the big picture thing about being good citizens and so on, then it has to be the entire life of the student in the university and not just what's happening in the math classroom. Okay.
I would like to answer this question of someone who is a third-year PhD student, I think Avinash Sharma. So he asked, is there a way to learn how to teach mathematics? I think there is a lot of thing which happened as far as this is concerned. We don't have any training program how to teach. We might be qualified, but I think there are some ways in which you can do this. As a PhD student, you can teach your juniors if you are in a university. And there is always a course where students are not very comfortable. Because this has happened with me when I was doing my PhD. Several students came to me and they said that, oh, we are not following such and such course, could you give some lectures? And then I gave unofficially lectures, and that there they were comfortable with me, and then I learned how to teach also. I think this is something which a serious research scholar has to do, how to teach. And remember that you have to start what students know, and from there you have to lead them to what they are supposed to know. So this is a very, very tricky scenario. And by giving lots of symposiums, a student can learn it at least at this point of time. We do not have any official mechanism except possibly some refresher courses to do that. Yeah, that's all.
Okay, thanks a lot, Dr. Acharya, and thanks again to all the panelists. Yeah, I'm sorry we couldn't take more questions. I see a lot more very good ones coming in the chat window, including an important one from Jayashri, some from Prathamesh, and so on. But I think we'll have to wrap up now. So yeah, I think maybe one of the most important things I got from this is that, as instructors, as Dr. Acharya said, we don't get any training, we just muddle through life. And I think the existence of a community like this where we can have conversations is probably extremely helpful. So yeah, thanks everyone. And Soumya, should we?
Yeah, so thanks a lot to all the panelists for this wonderful program today. I feel that we should have arranged a 3 to 4 hour program instead of just 1.5 hours. Yeah. So, and thanks to Tulsi for having this, chairing this session. Thanks a lot.